everybody, how y'all doing? My sister is here. You said say hi.
Hello people.
So we're actually at our parents' house because our parents didn't want us to be quarantined by ourselves in our apartment, so we came over here. So let's do an update before we start. Giselle, how's the quarantine going for you?
It's boring. I'm not working. I'm going to school and I'm an artist now, so I'm pretty talented.
I have a few updates. I have started working from home obviously because my office closed. So to distract myself from being so bored, I spent more time on TikTok, and I have actually gained a lot of followers on TikTok. I have 20,000 today. So it's been super exciting and super fun because people actually want to listen to what I have to say, because my entire life my family tell me to shut up because I talk too much. And on TikTok everybody's like, oh my god, we could hear you talking all day. And I'm like, really? You want to hear what I have to say?
That's just because we're all bored in quarantine.
Or because I have a fabulous personality and people like learning from me. So one of the main things that I do on TikTok is that I do informational videos. One day I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw a case about ICE that really made me upset. So then I decided that I wanted to share it with people on TikTok, and I made a video and it just like went off. And so from then, every time I see a news story that really like gets me fired up, I'll make a video about it and I'll post it on TikTok. And a lot of people like that I'm doing that. They like hearing news. And TikTok only does 1-minute videos, so there's only so much information I can give there. So I wanted to keep going with the ICE information. That's why I came to my YouTube channel so I can talk more about that here. This is a new series that we're gonna call Investigordas. So unfortunately during this quarantine, I've heard a lot of news stories regarding ICE. ICE stands for the U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement. Traditionally, their main role is to try to keep organized crime from entering the United States by filtering those who are allowed to enter the country and those who are not. So that's like the technical role of what they're supposed to do, but in reality what they do is that they torment immigrants trying to come into the United States. They are very racist on who they determine is a criminal and who isn't. Basically, if your skin is any sort of brown, you're not going to be allowed to come in, and if you're poor, you're certainly not allowed to come in. So ICE basically became a department in which they can legally discriminate against anybody who they don't want to come into the United States. I'm sure many of you have heard about ICE detention centers. ICE detention centers are basically jails where they hold immigrants until they get to meet with the judge, and the judge decides on whether or not they're going to grant their stay or if they're going to be deported back home. Conditions in detention centers are awful. People have to sleep on the floor. They only get an aluminum foil blanket. There's not enough food. There's no healthcare conditions. Since the Trump presidency began, ICE has terrorized immigrant communities a lot more. People have been getting educated on their rights and they know how to defend themselves if ICE was to show up at their door. For example, if an ICE officer was to show up at your door, you are not legally required to open that door. If you keep your door closed, an ICE officer legally cannot enter your house and detain you. You have to willingly open the door for the ICE agent to be allowed to come inside and detain you. So what a lot of immigrants started doing is they just wouldn't open their door for anybody. Then ICE officers started to get sneaky to get people to open their doors. One of the most recent cases that I heard was ICE pretending to be doctors that were testing people for the coronavirus. During the week of March 24th, ICE officers approached the home of Judith. Judith's husband is undocumented. When he asked who was at the door, ICE agents said that they were doctors testing for the coronavirus. Because they had been quarantined, he gladly opened the door because he wanted to get free coronavirus testing. As soon as he opened the door, ICE agents stormed in and detained him and took him to a detention center. Now, this is one of the extreme cases. It is super illegal in the United States for people to pretend to be doctors. You can't do that. There have been cases back in the 70s where people would pretend to be doctors and people ended up dying because those people actually had no idea what they're doing. So there have been laws put in place where somebody cannot imitate to be a doctor. A nonprofit picked this up. Their name is Sanctuary DMV. They tweeted about it. They got attention about it. And the ICE agents that pretended to be doctors are actually going to be arrested and they're going to be charged for the crime of pretending to be a doctor.
Isn't that also for law enforcement? Like you can go to jail for pretending to be a part of law enforcement or any type of government agent.
So for people who like regular citizens, yeah, it's illegal for you to pretend to be a cop, but for ICE officers there's an exemption. So after I learned about that case, obviously I was infuriated because we are in quarantine. People are literally dying from the coronavirus because we don't have tests, and you have to meet so many requirements to even be able to get tested. Them pretending to be doctors going door to door doing coronavirus testing is just pure evil. Honestly, if it wasn't for that now nonprofit like going on Twitter and tweeting about it, nobody would have known because they kept that silence. Like, this is one case that we know about where they got caught. We don't know how many times they've been doing this. It's such a cruel ruse for them to do, to pretend to be a doctor right now, especially when there's so much panic going on.
They're taking advantage.
They're completely taking advantage, and they're not doing this to keep the country safe. They're doing it because they're on a power trip.
Yeah.
Once I learned about that, I was obviously super upset, and it didn't make sense how ICE could think that that's okay. So I started doing more research to see if they do things like this often, and it turns out that they do this all the time. I'm not talking about them pretending to be doctors, but they act all the time to get people to come out of their houses, and it is 100% legal. The use of ruses, which is acting as you're somebody else, has been completely legal for ICE to conduct for over 14 years, and they actually include it as part of their training. Under the President George W. Bush, he sent a memo out to ICE agents encouraging them to act as if they're not an ICE agent to gain entry into immigrants' homes or to gain access to an immigrant's life so they can do surveillance on them. This was a letter from the President of the United States telling them that it's okay to trick people. In 2017, Representative Nidia Velasquez from New York City tried to introduce a bill to prevent ICE officers from wearing police on their uniforms. Sometimes when ICE go to pick up people, they knock on the door and they pretend to be police officers to get somebody to open the door. Velasquez was incredibly afraid of that because she didn't want the immigrant community to be afraid to report a case to the police, because she knew that if ICE was allowed to do this, people wouldn't report crimes to the police and immigrants would be vulnerable to crime. However, the bill got little to no traction. Nobody was supporting her and it failed. She tried to reintroduce it summer 2019, but again, it went nowhere, and ICE is still permitted to wear police uniforms while they're trying to detain an immigrant. This is a typical ruse that ICE agents will use when they're pretending to be police officers. They will walk up to the door, they'll knock, they'll say, "Police, open the door." When people ask what's going on, they will then put up a picture of a random person, and then they will say the name of one of the residents there and said, "We're looking for this person, their name is this." And now people will get really confused and they'll be like, "Well, that's my name, but that's not my face." So then they'll open the door to try to explain to police that they have the wrong person, and then ICE will just storm and detain them, and only after they have detained them, they will identify themselves as ICE officers. So this whole time, family members are watching and they think that the police are arresting their family member for no reason. The second ruse they'll use is they'll knock on the door and they'll say that a crime just happened at their neighbor's house and they need to get information because they're considered witnesses, and if they don't open the door, they're going to be considered suspects for the crime. So again, people will open the door because they want to clear their name because they haven't done anything, and again, ICE agents will storm in, they'll detain them, and only after they've been detained, or sometimes only after they've been taken to the detention center, they'll identify themselves as ICE officers. So you can imagine how confusing and how scary that situation is. Specifically right now, with all this police brutality, you have no idea what's going on. Representative Velasquez was right. This has caused a lot of fear in the communities to report crimes to police officers. Undocumented immigrants don't trust police because they think they're with ICE. Even though New York City is a sanctuary city, which means that the local government is not helping ICE whatsoever. They're not providing their addresses. If they're detained, they're not telling them that they're undocumented. The undocumented immigrants still don't trust them because ICE shows up at their door. They show up wearing a police uniform, so they never know if an officer is actually an officer or if they're an ICE agent pretending to be a police officer. That's terrifying.
Low income areas, they're usually the ones that are targeted. They'll know that immigrants are there, and people who are not family members to immigrants or immigrants themselves are not going to pay attention to these things. But like,
because it's something that doesn't happen to you, so you don't see it and you don't notice it,
and so you assume it's not happening.
Think about it. You can't have any trust on a police officer. Like, let's say it this way. You are in a relationship and there is domestic abuse in the relationship. You feel like you can't go and report it to the police because you don't know if they're going to be ICE agents at that police station and they're going to detain you for you trying to get out of a dangerous situation. It creates so much fear that you can't feel safe. You can't even feel safe with the people who are supposed to keep us safe. Now, this is besides police brutality, because we know even as US citizens, people are still dying for being brown in the United States. But now add another layer to that. You don't ever feel comfortable calling 911 when there's an emergency because you don't know if ICE is going to show up too. That's what ICE has become. It's terrorized immigrants so much that they have no trust in the government whatsoever. In Tennessee, ICE agents have taken it one step further. They actually pull people over and do fake traffic stops after they've been surveilling immigrants. They'll do surveillance on immigrants for weeks. They will follow them, they'll learn their daily routine, and they'll wait for them to be vulnerable, and then they'll conduct a traffic stop where they're by themselves and they'll detain them. And then the worst part is that in Tennessee, the sheriff's office was actually helping ICE. When they saw somebody driving that looked undocumented, they would do a fake traffic stop, and instead of detaining them or taking them back to the office or giving them a ticket, they would stop them and immediately call ICE so ICE could come and pick them up. How can you see somebody and say, oh, that person's undocumented? It was blatant racism and it was blatant racial profiling, because to a white sheriff in Tennessee, who do you think looks like they're undocumented? It's not a white guy, it's not a white woman. They would see brown people driving around Tennessee, pull them over, and instead of talking to them, instead of asking them for their information, they would just call ICE and have ICE pull up and take them to a detention center. And that happened not just once, it happened multiple times until nonprofits stepped in and called them out for it. Let me tell you a few more ruses that they have been caught using. So in New York City, they were caught several times posting fake ads that they needed people to come work with them under contractor work. People would go in trying to find work and ICE would be there and they would detain them. They would dress as a normal person and ask other immigrants for job opportunities, and they would show up to those factories and just conduct a huge raid. I spoke to a girl recently whose father in Virginia was deported after he went to an alcohol support group. ICE agents pretended to be an alcohol support group to get immigrants to go. They specifically advertised in Spanish so they can get undocumented immigrants there. And once people showed up, they detained them and deported them back to their countries. These people were just looking for support for alcoholism, and ICE took advantage of that and took them away. In New York, they've been known to go into people's workplaces and they've been known to show up to court. They don't go to court to arrest people. They go to court to see people's IDs to see who is undocumented and who is not. People in New York are afraid to go and be witnesses for certain cases. They know that ICE likes to hang out at courthouses, and they know that ICE will know that they're undocumented and they possibly will start surveillance on them. So this is doing nothing to keep our community safe. It's actually doing the opposite. It's creating more dangerous situation. It's making people more afraid of the police. It's making immigrants vulnerable to crime. Only thing that ICE is doing is creating terror.
They're targeting immigrant groups. They don't feel safe in this country,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
they also don't feel safe where they came from, and they don't feel safe here.
And ICE is trying to make them feel unwelcome and unsafe
They
here.
don't treat them like humans. They dehumanize them in the detention center. They don't feed them properly. They don't clothe properly. At some point, I think I heard something about them not being able to shower often. They're just completely taking their humanity away when they're taking them there.
They're treating them worse than they treat animals.
Exactly.
Period. Because they don't care about them. They make the detention centers as terrible as possible, that they have a negative image of the United States and they don't try to come back. Like, it's disgusting.
They also don't allow them to make phone calls at all over there. I
It's like they're in jail. They have to pay for it.
But they don't have money to pay for it. So there's no way that these people can call their lawyers or their family to
And ICE is always listening. So they can cut off your call whenever.
Exactly.
Speaking of cutting calls whenever, one of my videos that I made on TikTok was about something that happened at a detention center. On March 23rd or 24th, I believe, a case came out where ICE agents had barely told their detainees about the coronavirus. We were aware of coronavirus since January, and then we were aware of coronavirus in the United States since February. ICE agents didn't tell their detainees about the coronavirus until late March. And when they told the detainees about coronavirus and they started asking questions, ICE officers got annoyed and pepper sprayed them. They pepper sprayed the room, and then they ran out of the room and they locked the people in the room for an entire hour before they came in. People started panicking because they thought that they had just been tear gassed. There were people who fainted, people's eyes were burning, and they didn't get access to the showers until the next day. When ICE agents came back in, they had hazmat suits on because they didn't want to get any of the pepper spray on them. They didn't report this. They didn't report that they did this. The only reason why we knew about this was because a lawyer happened to call his client that day, and she started telling him about it, and then the call got dropped and he was unable to reach her until the next week. You can't tell me that ICE isn't evil and isn't on a power trip. People obviously are going to have questions about their safety. You have 40 people per cell and the coronavirus is easily transmittable. Obviously they're going to be concerned, and they got annoyed that they were asking questions like that, so they pepper sprayed them in the United States in 2020. That's how we're treating people. So another case that didn't get enough media attention happened in New York. In early February, Gaspar Avendaño left his home in Brooklyn early in the morning for work. Avendaño was an undocumented Mexican immigrant who had been previously deported back in 2011 after pleading guilty to an assault charge only to return. As Avendaño was leaving his home, he was confronted by two men wearing ordinary clothes. The men did not identify themselves and they began to struggle. Avendaño's stepson came out of the house and saw that his stepfather was being attacked by two men. While the three men were struggling, Avendaño got tased. As his stepson ran closer to him, one of the men pulled out a gun and shot his stepson in the face. Turns out that the two men trying to grab Avendaño were actually two ICE officers who did not identify themselves. Obviously, if you see that your father is being attacked on the street by two men, you're going to try to stop them, which is what Avendaño's stepson was trying to do as ICE agents pulled out their gun and just shot him. Avendaño and his stepson were taken to the hospital. Word quickly got out that this had happened, so there were a lot of protesters outside trying to prevent ICE from entering. ICE pushed their way inside, and as soon as Avendaño's wounds were patched up, they took him to a detention center. Avendaño's stepson, he was here at the United States on a tourist visa. He was visiting his mom for the month. The son is okay. The bullet went in diagonally, so it went into his cheek and then it got lodged in his ear. He had to have surgery, but he's alive. So as you can see from the things that I've talked about so far, ICE agents' detention strategies are meant to confuse and terrorize the community. They could do things like clearly identifying themselves to prevent people from being terrified and not knowing what's going on, but they choose not to keep people confused. They do things like show up really early in the morning so you're really drowsy and you don't know what's going on while they're talking to you. They'll dress up like police officers. They'll make their badges similar to police officers. Under the government's eyes, it is 100% okay for them to terrorize immigrant communities like this. And even in quarantine, ICE is still continuing to detain people. After governors across the United States have made orders that you shouldn't gather groups more than 10 people, ICE is still locking up more and more immigrants and putting them in cells that have more than 40 people in them. That's the state of our country right now. Immigrants out there, please, please, please Google your rights. There are lots of nonprofits out there that have pamphlets that tell you exactly what you should do if you come across ICE. If you suspect that ICE agents are surveilling you, look out for American-made vehicles with dark tinted windows. ICE agents will always have American-made vehicles with dark tinted windows. Just look out for one another. Do not open your door, even if they say they're police, because police officers will have a warrant if they really need to come in. Keep your door closed. And if you're not an immigrant, look out for your undocumented friends. Allies are some of the greatest resources. Use your privilege as a U.S. resident or as a U.S. citizen to help your undocumented friends. This is a really confusing time in our country right now. There's a lot going on at once, and undocumented people shouldn't have to worry about ICE on top of that.
I would hope that we don't live in fear due to this, because fear can only get you so far, and fear does not protect you. Like you said, allies and those who are affected by this all need to get together and educate ourselves or each other. In all honesty, like, a lot of the things that ICE is doing is illegal, and if you know you're right, you can definitely
fight back.
You can fight back, right?
That's
Even
why
if you are an immigrant, you can go to court and you won't get deported for it.
That's why ICE works so hard to try and confuse people, because they know that most of the things that they're doing isn't right and that they could get charged for it. But if they keep you confused and disoriented, you have no idea what's going on.
Like, you have to be careful, because ICE does not care. They will use aggression. They will, hurt you. And so if you manage to get out of that situation, definitely get yourself a lawyer and take it to court, and don't be afraid, because ICE is not always in the right.
Educate, resist, empower, and above all, be safe. Thank you for watching the first episode of Investigordas. I'll keep myself accountable to posting a lot more often. Thank you for watching, and we will see you all at the next video. Bye!